After the demographics, we look at the big enchilada here, firing. Remember, firing is 36% actually in the whole database of all the action. There's discharge, there's constructive discharge, and then we throw in related things like who gets laid off, who gets involuntary retirement. These are little tiny things, but they all relate to termination. Who gets severance pay, who gets an early retirement incentive. We take all these firing and related things, and you'd expect to see numbers like 31% or higher, 36%. In general population, there's your number, 32. Blindness, 25. Deafness, 24. There's a significant difference. Blindness is higher than deafness, but both of them are much lower than Gen Pop. Low number of allegations is good. As a matter of fact, the sensory group has the lowest possible filing rate of any disability groups. I mean, look at that. That's a huge relative value difference of 6.6 points. Very significant, practically significant, very meaningful. We don't know why, but very meaningful.
So Brian, the sensory impairment group, they have proportionally more allegations in hiring,
right,
than compared to the general group, but they have proportionally way lower allegations in firing or discharge. So we might conclude that they experience more difficulties and more discrimination on the, getting in the front door, right? But once they're in, they don't experience as much difficulty keeping their jobs.
Yes.
Maybe. Yeah.
That firing coming up to make that point. But yeah, that is probably going to be, the biggest takeaway. Thanks for stealing my thunder.
That's all right. Well, and that'll conclude our program, ladies and gentlemen. No, I'm just kidding.
Nothing like blowing the punchline. Okay.
That's right. Sorry about that.
By the way, constructive discharge is something that's really interesting. It's small in numbers. Most people don't know what it means. The general population is 2.4. It's like blindness, 2.5. But this group, here you go. It's like harassment and intimidation. A constructive discharge means we're going to get rid of Phil at the University of Kentucky. And the way we're going to get rid of Phil is we're going to give him a class on Monday at 8 in the morning and 8 at night. And Tuesday, and a weekend class. And we're going to give them all the advisees who are just like hell raisers and the worst students in the department. I know Ralph is already planning these things for Phil. So, I don't want to blow his cover, but the point here is we're not going to say you're fired. We're just going to make working conditions so unbearable for you that you quit. And did you know that if that happens to you and you quit, you can file a charge of discrimination for constructive discharge because you probably have pretty much evidence to fill it up. So it does happen. It happens 3%, 3-4% of the time, but that's a huge number for deafness. And the same reasons that we saw deafness in harassment and intimidation are the reasons you see in constructive discharge. These little things don't matter too much, but they might be of interest to you. There's not a lot going on. The biggest findings are up there in the green ink, and we can move on. After discharge, after the mother load is a reasonable accommodation. You can see the general population representation, 20%. 1 out of 5 cases in the non-sensory impairment group is failure to accommodate when it was reasonable. 21% for blindness, so that's a lookalike. But that 21 compared to 20.9 compared to 1993 is significantly different. So the deaf people are lower, but reasonable accommodation, and it's really surprising to me. I don't know, because what it shows is that this is how, people have employers have a lot of problems with reasonable accommodation. They don't know, what it is, how it works, who job accommodations network is. and 20% of the action is a complaint about reasonable accommodation. But it's no different for sensory. It really hovers around the general population. They're not having more problems with sensory impairments than accommodating the other three huge groups that are much bigger. They're not having fewer problems. They just kind of fit right in. That's the real takeaway on reasonable accommodation. It's a huge, important finding, but they are not really highly significantly, different from one another, but and nor from a general population group. Harassment intimidation, this is always everybody's favorite. I don't know, they love this issue. Everybody wants to study harassment and intimidation in disability world. And it's quite interesting. Here, the general population is 8.8. It splits the difference. Deafness is very different than blindness. Deafness is much more, 19.6 relative value difference, much higher than it is in the blind group. And blind is below general population, and deafness is way above that and way above blindness. Intimidation, we do show these together because they go together. One is really, believe it or not, when you say harassment intimidation, the definitions are the same. It's really the location where it occurred. So most harassment and intimidation occurs off of the work site. You can see it in everything. Let's just look at the general population. 8.8% complaints, but they're off of the work site that the person is reporting. They're still being harassed and intimidated, and it's affecting them at work. 1.3% is happening on campus, in other words, at the work site. So this is a really interesting and important slide, and it'll show up again a little bit later. Terms and conditions of employment. I'll go quickly on this. It's best just to read terms and conditions. This is all the little stuff. Work rules, work conditions, job environment, privileges, shift, vacation, attire, task assignment. But we throw in terms and conditions of employment and related. We throw in wages. We throw in benefits. We throw in exclusive or segregated unions. We throw everything in that is, we bundle a lot of issues because they really are terms and conditions kinds of things. And what you see here is the only thing that is significantly different between deaf, blind, and even the general population is, of course, wages is significantly different. And I can tell you, like, long stories. I worked in deafness rehab in Chicago doing, job placement kinds of things. And, they told me how happy their deaf employees were at Harris National Bank. And, I said, I want to meet all of them and interview them. I interviewed, there were 29 of them. And they said, yeah, we really like it here. Nobody talks to us. We're alone. And we're all in the same job we started with. And they were there 10 years and up. Not one of them. And they could point to presidents who they trained, presidents of the bank who they trained when that person was originally employed. But, wages is a big problem. But deaf is not different than blind, but it's way worse than the general population. And when you come down here to benefits, whether they're insurance benefits or non-wage compensation of any kind of benefits like parking, gifts, bonuses, discounts, and those kinds of things, they have far fewer problems. Their complaints are much more rare than the general population and different from each other. More problematic for the blind than for the deaf group, but less problematic than the general population. And those are just the way you read these tables. We're going to simplify it a lot, much more in the conclusion. Getting close to the end here for a break and a question break, discipline and related. You see here, exactly what it means. All kinds of discipline, you're getting chewed out for something. Demotion, suspension, those are the related. You look at them, you got positive differences, more problems with demotion for the blind, more problems with discipline in general, the big one, bigger discipline one for the deaf, significant differences in both places. Not significant differences in suspension, but suspension is 1/8. They're way lower in getting suspended than the general population. They're right about in the middle, splitting. The general population is splitting, the 1-2 and the 1-5 for demotion. But the big one, of course, is 5 points is the standard. So what's going on in deafness is just general disability consistent, but blind people are having substantially lower levels of discipline problem than the hearing loss or the general population group. We're done with the issues. Now we get to who wins and who loses. Want to make this short, so I'm going to just give you the short version of it. If you want to see the components that go into a merit litigation or a non-merit litigation, you find them over here in this column. What we're going to look at is just total merit and total non-merit. I hope. Okay. So merit means the people won. Basically, the charging party won their case. They persisted in it. It closed. These investigations take 6 months to a year. They require a lot of documentation. The 2,000 investigators nationally that work for the EEOC are very competent, very compassionate, very caring. They are not your disability advocate. They are not your employer advocate. Their job is to find aid. Typically attorneys, young attorneys, very social justice minded. Their job is to mediate it if possible. Job is to investigate it and make a determination if discrimination occurred or not. So what you see here in the green is the win rate for the general population that doesn't include sensory over here on the right, in this first green column, is 23. The win rate is 26.5 and 26.9 for our two sensory groups. That is not different from each other, but that would be, if we had computed it, substantially higher than general population. They are among the most winning impairment groups in the entire database. Non-merit then must be the opposite, because if they're winning more, excuse me, I keep fumbling here. If they're winning more, let's see what happens. They're actually doing quite well. They're not different from one another. 65%. These are no cause findings. The EEOC says, we investigated your case, we completed everything. Phil, I'm sorry, your complaint does not rise to the level of discrimination. And I'll tell you why. There's not sufficient evidence to think that discrimination occurred. It might have been inappropriate. It might have been unkind. I could see where you feel that way. You have to understand, as a psychologist, and it hurts people's sensitivities, a non-merit finding is a perception of discrimination on the part of the charging party, but it could not be legally verified. So that happens in the general population 68% of the time, 65% of the time, and 65% of the time. They're 3 points under. And that is very, very low to be beneath, to have fewer. Well, you expect that they're going to have fewer merit findings, okay? Because they had more, fewer non-merit findings because they had more merit findings. And that's what happens. It has to be adjusted someplace to get to 100%. What's really good down here, though, is these administrative closures. So this is 10% of all the cases closed that are closed on a technicality. We call these non-merit, and we use the let's go out for a beer example. At the end of the day, the EOC comes in and says, we had to close the case on a technicality. Who goes out for a beer? The employer goes out for a beer. We're glad to have that off of our desk. We feel kind of bad about the guy, but something happened. There's a closure on a administrative matter or a technicality. Now there's 8 kinds of codes for that. So I'll just give you maybe 3 examples. It gets closed on a technicality if the employer goes out of business or closes up their shop. It gets closed on a technicality if the charging party doesn't show up for appointments. It gets closed on a technicality if the employer went bankrupt. It gets closed on a technicality if there's just no documentation, no smoking gun, no smoking peanut that this occurred, no witnesses. But that happens 90% of the time, and that happens at every place in employment law, not just ADA. And that number is actually coming down all the time, which means the process is getting smoother. It used to be 11%. But they're having fewer closures on technicalities, as you see, 7-8% and 8-4 than the 9-0, which means that they're persistent, they know their rights, they're sticking it out till it's closed. They just don't throw up their arms and quit. A lot of times, if it was a hiring matter and you found another job, you're just going to say, I just don't have time to run around with the EOC and see if anything can happen, or you move to another state, or there's all kinds of things that close technicalities, but that to me shows that it's lower than Gen Pop, shows that they are persistent in the process, and that speaks well to their consumer advocacy groups like American Federation of Blind, National Federation of Blind, ADERA, American Council on Hearing. We'll post those up a bit later. I just want to point out that merit or non-merit is good news and bad news. A non-merit allegation means the allegation was frivolous, it was rejected on a technicality maybe, or it was unable to rise to the level of an actual discriminatory event. There was no reasonable cause. This allegation amounts to perceived discrimination. Merit means a settlement was achieved. Who goes out for a beer? The charging party. Or the EOC found that evidence is sufficient to conclude that a discriminatory event actually occurred. So is merit good or bad? Here's the argument that high merit rate is bad. Well, at closing, each merit finding is an actual or verified discriminatory event. As such, it's unlawful, it's insidious, it's a cause of substantial distress to both parties. A remedy for breach is demanded. It's one way to look at it. Merit is good. High merit rate is good. And I love the high merit rate here I see for sensory. I believe it suggests that there's a need for higher levels of ADA literacy among sensory impaired charging parties, but they're persisting, they're doing pretty good, and their win rate is good. I believe that it may be an endorsement of impairment-specific state VR agencies. Phil and I have this debate quite often. You still have a situation where, as in Kentucky, they no longer have separate administrative agencies for sensory impairment with the Office of the Deaf and the Office of Blind and a big, heavy, top-heavy administration. They have specialty counselors in state VR, but they're all together in state VR. Okay, very few states, that's the impact of the cross-disability movement. Very few states have taken that action. You still have at least half where they have separate agencies for the blind and separate agencies sometimes for the deaf. That's what we have here in Virginia. It may suggest that there's an endorsement of impairment-specific state agencies. That may be one of the reasons why sensory claims look different, and in many cases, quite normal as far as disability goes and going quite smoothly. It may suggest that utilization by a specific disability community like sensory or advocacy efforts for their specific sensory conditions would be prudent. They appear to be more aware, more aggressive and persistent in asserting their civil rights. They seem to know the difference between the perception of discrimination and actual discrimination, which is going to be quite a challenge when you're talking about sensory. And so here's the big takeaway. This slide is actually a variation of a study we did in 2016 when we looked at broad categories of disability. But here's what you see on those issues we talked about. This is what where Phil was stealing my thunder. I'm gonna figure out a way for payback on that. I don't know what to quite do about it. But here you have discharge and related, and this was Phil's point. But let's start with hiring and related. Number 3 over here. Hiring and related, when you add in the related for sensory, is at 17%. And what the brown group is, or the reddish brown group is our Gen Pop. Okay, all the other 660,000 conditions. Now we're comparing them on the basis of proportions. It's almost twice as high in hiring and related as all other disabilities combined. They're having trouble getting in the door. The old hire the handicapped movement of, the regrettable expression of handicap of the, 30s and so on, might need more attention and restoration in terms of job seeking, job getting, work adjustment training, soft skills. They might need more selective job placement and attention. And that's, yeah, it's broken. That's not a good sign. But look, when they come to work, they're discharged 20% less often. These are when, by the way, the orange is deafness and blindness combined, all sensory. So when you average out their discharge problem, it's one of the lowest in the database. When you average out their hiring problem, it's probably the highest. Reasonable accommodation is a bump. They look just like Gen Pop. Harassment and intimidation is a bump. It looks just like Gen Pop. Terms and conditions of employment, it's not a bump. It's a little higher in sensory, and we know that it's a little higher there for deafness. We also know that harassment and intimidation got to be at 10% for deafness. Discipline and related, wow, you got to be pleased. The sensory groups are having substantially less, because these are lower numbers. This would be a significant difference. Substantially less problems with discipline once, again, discipline related once they access the job. Get them in the door, they do better than the average disability Joe. Getting them in the door, therein lies the rub. So in a general sense, there are these kind of small but statistically significant differences between deaf and blindness, but they hold together. In a general sense, the real interesting findings that we almost didn't even record for this presentation and the article that's behind this presentation is how similar they are, but how much different they are when compared to Gen Pop. And that really is the takeaway.